to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne, and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to Stargate to the Cosmos. And I'm your host, Jeff Sharlet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin, and our producer is Thomas Becker and Revolution Radio Studio B. But today we're going to do a panel, and the panel consists of myself, Jeff Sharlet Lessin, Dr. Sasha Lessin, Russell Scott Brinegar, Karen Christine Patrick, and I'm sure our producer, Thomas Becker, amadpainter, will chime in now and again. And we're going to do some controversial topics. Recently on Netflix, there was a series called The Family. It was a 5-part series, and it's basically created by author Jeff Sharlet. And we're talking about is America becoming a theocracy? Who are the family? Has Christian religion been hijacked by the Evangelical Right? We're going to talk about Satanism versus Luciferianism, the history of the Satanic movement in the USA, the comparison of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, Michael Aquinos Temple of Set, and Lucien Grieves Satanic Temple. I don't know much about all this, but I guess Russell's been studying it. Is Satan real? Who really controls the planet? Are God, Satan, angels, and demons extraterrestrial? And we're going to throw in a little bit about the basic minimum needs economy and anything else that crosses our mind. But this 2 hours is going to go fast. Dr. Lessin, are you there? What would you like to say about today's show?
Oh, just, it's like The Handmaid's Tale has arrived in many countries where people are being killed because they're gay, and there's the stochastic murders that he creates with his hate. And so this fundamental cult has blessed him and said he's the chosen one, and we must all follow him. And you can see where this is going. This is, if he isn't impeached before he calls a state of emergency or martial law even over some pretext, let's just hope that this program helps bring about his impeachment.
Okay. So I'm not sure exactly where we want to start, so let's bring on Karen Christine Patrick. Karen had a little hiatus, so taking care of her health and things, and she's back, and we're so happy she's back. So, Karen.
I'm back.
Oh, welcome back. She's back.
Yeah. I was reading the titles of what all you were going to talk about, and I was going, we're going off into the deep end on my way back here, so that's good.
Well, I think, and I do want to, it's a deep water, and I do want to do a little sound check with Russell, but, Karen and I were raised in these satanic cults, so it's kind of like right down our alley. It's not funny. It isn't funny, but you have to laugh that we survived it and we made it. So we're really familiar with the evangelical Christian cult that has taken over many parts of the world right now. And I do want to let me do a quick sound check with Russell. Hi, Russell. We talked before the show, but now we're on the back end. Can you say hi and welcome back to the show, Russell?
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Oh, thank you for coming. So let's see, where do we want to start? We have a lot of things we can talk about. Real quickly, Russell and Karen, where do you want to start? We'll follow your lead. What topic do you want to go on first?
Well, you mentioned that you're. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh no, I like where you were going with the fact that we have a religious control cult. Within evangelicalism, which is within Christianity as a whole, and there's left, groups and right groups. But what it sort of looked like the topics all surrounded was the idea that there's this group of people who, in my opinion, what I understand of who Jesus was purported to be and his words and the spiritualism behind it kind of took a turn into religion, which took a turn into politics and political power. And that's always, part of my hiatus is watching all these shows on Netflix about, the Borgias and the Medici and the popes. And so this sort of push-pull of religion and state, and where is the individual and the family in the middle of all this? For a while now, and it seems like it's kind of coalesced into this moment that we have that I love The Handmaid's Tale, I watched that too, where Margaret Atwood was talking about, what she saw in other totalitarian regimes that had religious overtones and how it could happen here for something that wouldn't. Here we are, and now today, a woman, House of Representatives, Speaker of the House, stood up and said, we're going to impeach this president. So this is history today, all this.
Yes. It is a historical moment on many levels. So I think that is appropriate that we do start with that 5-part miniseries called The Family, and we talk about impeachment and what that means to the world. So who would like... Russell, are you good at summarizing what the series was about? Because you watched it a couple of times, I think. Okay, Russell, tell our audiences what we're talking about, because some people have not seen it.
Okay, Netflix came out with a miniseries called The Family, which was done by a documentary filmmaker who actually infiltrated this organization and found out a lot about it. It was founded back in 1935 by a man named Abraham Variety, and it's gone through several morphs and developments and evolutions. The latest central figure is a fellow named David Coe, who passed of a heart attack in 2017. But before he passed, he and a group of his associates were able to lay hands on Trump and bless his administration. And this is something that this miniseries really helped me to understand, because if you look at Trump and the life that he has led, it seems like he's the very last person that evangelicals or religious people would want to embrace. But this miniseries, The Family, actually explained the thought process behind that. Doug Coe, I actually have a lot of respect for Doug Coe, because he was really sincerely trying to fulfill the Great Commission that Jesus gave in the New Testament before his ascension, of go out into all the world and preach the gospel. And what he was trying to do, he felt that stealth was the best way to go about it. And the thing I do admire about him is that he didn't seem to be in it for glory or fame for himself. He was rather a humble figure. And what they've tried to do is they feel like they're emulating Christ, who went to the wealthy and powerful to speak his message. So they intentionally pick wealthy, powerful, imperfect people. And he gives the example of King David. King David was chosen by God, and King David was somebody that threw a woman's husband in the front lines of battle to have him killed because he wanted his wife. He wasn't a perfect person by any means. So I never did understand these evangelicals on TV that would compare Trump to King Cyrus or King David or anything like that. I was like, you've got to be kidding. But this miniseries, The Family, really explained that thought process, that they intentionally pick imperfect people because they feel like if they don't intervene and work with these grievously flawed individuals, that the world might go astray or something really bad might happen. So one of the reasons that these evangelicals have embraced Trump is not because he's a saint, but for the very reason that he is imperfect, and without their guidance, he might lead us into something very terrible. So that helped understand that backdrop on why they might have picked somebody like Trump. And as far as impeachment goes, I feel like personally that Trump is the poster child for why the concept of impeachment was invented, because he's violated several amendments of the Constitution, emoluments, the separation of powers. This most recent event of trying to, even after getting in trouble and Robert Mueller investigating him over working with Russia to get dirt on Hillary, he did it in broad daylight. It's like the guy thinks he's above the law and that he can do no wrong. And one of the influences, another influence that evangelicals have embraced Trump is this new cult of prosperity theology. And prosperity theology, if you look into the history of religion, is the oldest con in the book. It basically says, give your money to me, and by doing so, the windows of heaven will open up and bless your finances and your health, and your life will be wonderful. And as a result of that being put out on to millions of people through these TV evangelist programs, millions of people give millions of dollars to these people. Joel Osteen lives in a $12 million mansion, and all of these TV evangelists that promulgate this, what I would consider a Christian heresy, which is money worship, prosperity theology. They all live lives of luxury, and they depend on the donations of people of very modest or poor means.
Okay. So you're done? I guess we should say I'm done passing the talking stick. So, okay. I think we should go boy, girl. So, Karen, you're next. Pick up that talking stick and take it for the next 4 or 5 minutes, and then when you're finished, please say, I'm complete for now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I felt good. I appreciate it. So I watched the whole entire miniseries through one time, and I'm not sure if I need to do it another time. I didn't watch it, I lived it. So I was raised in a fundamentalist group, a Protestant fundamentalist group, and so I typically will say grew up in a cult, and that's quite true. It was a group kind of situation. And the group had, so I can relate to the concept in the miniseries based on what I saw kind of happening in my group, because before we got to the point where we have this mass prosperity gospel kind of thing culminating in, sort of not exactly a divine right of kings exactly, but the idea that rich people are, better because they're more blessed than we are as poor. You're sort of reverse the psychology there, follow through anyway. And promised by God. So there's a what sounds good part of it and a reality to it that did culminate within my group and created a secondary cult from the original sort of cul-de-sac Christian church kind of denomination. Not a lot, tremendous amount of exciting there, but it's where people went on Sunday, in their neighborhood kind of thing. That's the kind of background, and then it's this other part of it sort of morphed into something else entirely. And then I would say that the group that we have now, the sort of evangelical mob mentality we have now, is coming from a number of different subgroups. Some are paramilitary in their mindset. There's sort of onward Christian soldiers stuff that literally can be rooted back in the Civil War era. There's also the family values people, which have very specific, narrow definition of what a family is or should be. And we have I do not want to generate these people, but just saying do-gooder people. But they're people who enjoy the part where you get involved in a kind of reach to help the homeless, or, they like to help people. So they use the avenue of the religion. And there's people who have a genuine, this sort of faith-based system. But I feel like this thing that came along kind of co-opted bits and pieces of all of that and turned it into sort of a manifest destiny of the United States based on very narrow interpretations and not necessarily long-term traditional interpretations of Protestant Christianity, and became this thing that we're seeing that is now culminated into something quite confusing, because in the for power, in the ultimate fulfillment of the idea of prosperity gospel, you've got this leadership situation that has elevated someone who probably does not resonate with a lot of people doing it for the sake of power or hierarchy or what they perceive to be a greater good. So I get it. I get where these people are coming through. I have a little bit of sympathy in terms of, at some level, they want some kind of spirituality and they want some good things for themselves and their family, but things have happened. And I've been terribly interested in what happened. So this has been a study of mine ever since I officially got out of the group I was in, that I grew up in about 35 years ago. And, because I got family and I'm curious, what do people think of it? It's been a curiosity of mine. So I'll pass the stick on that one.
Okay, Sasha, your turn. And Sasha, you didn't watch the series, but you have a lot to say anyway, so go ahead.
Okay, I am duly chastised. I didn't watch the series.
Bad boy. He didn't do his assignment. Go ahead.
But it seems to me that what we have is a dichotomization, what Ray calls the God flu, that if you don't belong to my church, I've got this antibodies that won't let me take in any other beliefs except the beliefs of my church. And I consider every other belief a disease. And that's sort of where it is. And so what we have is a bunch of people who have abdicated their authority to this group, and it's something very tangible. Emil Durkheim, one of the founders of my discipline, said that one of the things that people are feeling are their coherent field with each other. They feeling something numinous that's beyond themselves. It's greater than they are, and it sustains them. And that's that wonderful group feeling that people get when they sing together or row a boat together. And so people are having genuine experiences, but it's being channelized into an institution, which actually removes people from their spiritual experience and sets them into a permanent dualism. And basically, that's what's happened in the United States. This group started with small countries where they could bribe their way in and influence that company to start castrating people and running Sharia law and all kinds of stuff, but ultimately murdering people in the streets and in the jails and beating them up and having the authorities say, hey, that's groovy. And it's so contrary to the message of Jesus, who was rebelling against authority and saying you can have direct spiritual experiences. You don't have to pay these dudes to have it. Anyway, there's my 2 cents. I pass.
Okay. Well, I want to go back to what Russell said. I think Doug Coe was totally manipulating psychological manipulation of humanity by using Jesus, because Jesus is an archetype that people see as kind, loving, and conscious, and taking and creating that little book, Jesus is all you need. Jesus is nothing else. It's another hijacking of a spiritual concept, and it's being manipulated into eventual castration of or clitorectomies of human females, the death penalty for basically the death penalty for people who are gay, life sentences for people who support their gay family members and friends or do anything to protect them from this witch hunt, so to speak. Eventually, it's going to involve clitorectomies for women. The same thing that we're protesting against with Sharia law and what the Muslims do. It's turning Christianity into the same thing by limiting free will and defining how we can behave, who we can love, and how we can behave sexually. And that's what we fought against for the last 50, 60 years. And they're moving it into not nonpartisan, so they're embracing all religions, and they're trying to make them all Christian. It's the original dictate, I guess, of the Christian religion, go out and convert. But this is literal, and it's a psychological manipulation, but it's also a power manipulation, and it's saying to all the world leaders, if you really want to be powerful, you join this prayer group, and we will set up a prayer breakfast in your country, and if you're really following suit and following the rules, you'll get invited to the prayer group in Washington, D.C., and then you'll be part of this group that takes over the whole planet. And so everybody's saying Jesus. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. It has everything to do with who's ruling this planet, who has all the money, who has all the wealth, who has all the power. And I'll give it back to Russell.
Okay, well, this evolved into something called the National Prayer Breakfast, and the person that did the documentary film series, The Family, says that the National Prayer Breakfast is, as we speak, 100% the family. And Janet, you're exactly right. What this represents now is access to a Christian voting base by up-and-coming politicians who want to be associated with this movement and want to be associated with the National Prayer Breakfast and be on the inside of that because it gives them access to position and power. And it's also a insight to the Russian connection, because in 1954, Eisenhower attended the National Prayer Breakfast, and one of the things he said was that we need a strong, God-fearing nation. Communism was seen as very atheistic, and people were afraid the Red Scare and everything, this atheist force was going to take over the world. And in so saying that, God was weaponized. And now, the way the National Prayer Breakfast is, Maria Butina, a Russian associate, attended the National Prayer Breakfast, and her job, according to this miniseries, was to cozy up to U.S. political persons and influence them to Moscow's goals. So not only do you have American politics involved in the National Prayer Breakfast now, you've got people who had ties with Russia and the goals of Moscow attending this to co-opt some of the politicians into policies that are more coordinating with the desires of Vladimir Putin. And so in the 90s, the Reverend Billy Graham and others went to Russia, and I noticed a big difference. I was kind of brought up in the era of Billy Graham, and I always kind of had a respect for him. I didn't agree with certain tenets of his fundamentalism, but I did think that he was a sincere person in what he believed. But I can't say the same for his offspring. And they've executed a huge double standard on former politicians like Bill Clinton or President Obama, and it just doesn't apply with Trump. It's like Trump can do no wrong. There's no criticism coming at all from the evangelical crowd. So Christianity itself is being hijacked into the political arena. There's something called dominionism, and within the ranks of dominionism, they believe that the people who run the United States should only be Christian. Only Christians should hold office. And some of them have some really scary militaristic, apocalyptic views. They see themselves as a major player in this war, this Armageddon war, and some of them even want to bring about Armageddon to expedite the second coming of Christ. And there's people in our military that are of this mindset that want this all-out World War III to expedite the second coming. So you really get into some scary areas there. I'm complete.
Okay, Karen.
Yeah, no, that was some good insights, Russell. And in the meantime, I can be a witness to what goes on within the groups in terms of the dynamics, first of all, of patriarchy and abuse. So we have writ large the scandal in the Catholic Church where we have the priests who were abusing women and especially children. And there was a dynamic to protect the brand of the Catholic Church so that they were moving these guys around. And then, of course, that's kind of outed as a big scandal. But I can assure you that in these groups, this sort of thing, humans are humans, was kind of going on as well in terms of when you start to try to protect the image of something that's good, it may not stay good. And so that was a struggle. As well as the family dynamics, you tended to attract, the group I was in was actually quite well known, and I can attest, attracted families who were used to the pattern of paternalistic abuse, where they have vaulted up the man as he's the boss of everything, and they even have Christian discipline groups that believe that the man should physically assault his wife in order to keep her in line, and like she's a child or something. And so we now actually have something called Evangelical movement. So that's EX. These are people who have left the movement typically because of the fact that they were gay or lesbian or transsexual bi and were being, I actually had a close friend who told me he passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, and about a year before he passed away from cancer, he told me that he had been one of these kids that were sent to the conversion therapy early program. So this is before they had like camps to do that. They had individual treatment, and he was sent to a Christian counselor approved in our denomination. And then he never said anything about it, but he wanted to tell somebody. He said that he had a device put on his penis, and if they showed him all kinds of images, and if he had some kind of arousal, they were shocking him, and stuff. And I was shocked. Not only that, I knew who this guy was that was doing this to him. So it was like, whoa, And the other thing that went on though too, in my actual the church I grew up in, we actually had a minister who was sent out of California who was a pedophile, sent to our church that had a daycare and a scout troop. So what could go wrong there? I was like, did he request the assignment? I don't know, but it was really a disaster. And my dad was actually one of the ones that, when more stories came in and more complaints to the church, he actually helped do the background check on this guy. And this guy had been coming up for conviction, and then he was quite wealthy, so he'd pay off his debt. Kind of a mini Epstein wannabe guy. And so, so so there's that situation, and people would say, oh, that's that one bad apple in the barrel. But what was going on was the dynamics of the other people in the group not supporting victims, because you didn't want to make the church look bad, or you didn't want to cross the minister who had a high amount of authority. So inside all of these types of groups, there's a lot of dynamics going on that is creating its own sort of backlash because people are coming out and saying what kinds of abusive things were done, like you were talking about, Janet, that could become, similar to what we see in third countries. If you want to see abuses continue, if they are not unchecked, if there's no justice, if there's no mechanisms for victims to speak out, and that's really important. The thing I struggle with is I considered myself deprogramming myself. Some people in ex-evangelical movement say deconverting, but I had to go through just learning how to speak what was going on to me. What kind of things that were happening to me were making me feel bad about myself, for instance. So there's a lot of that going inside those groups too.
Okay, are you complete?
I am.
Okay, so you're the next person after you is Sasha. So, Sasha.
Yeah. So this sounds a little bit like the doctrine of the elite that Calvin promulgated, that those in power and authority and wealth are blessed by God, and you can tell you're blessed by God if you are, and if you don't got it, you ain't. However, it's from my perspective, all the institutions that require finances from people tend to become businesses, and you can look at the Catholic Church or the Mormon Church and see how both of them have established hegemony. For example, in the state of Arizona, the people that ultimately make the huge decisions about things are part of a Catholic hierarchy, which is devoted to the Knights of Columbus's goals. They're pledged to it as their life possession. And also in the Mormon Church, you could look at the Mormons have taken over a lot of the administration of the United States. In other words, what we have here is the failure for what Weber calls the regularization of charisma. You get a real cool person full of life and like AOC or Jesus, and they're the real thing. Buddha was the real thing. And then you get the institution that say, hey, we want the offerings. Anyway, that's it. Next. Oh, Janet, you got to tell them about what happened when they kidnapped you and tried to indoctrinate you.
Well, yeah, because this really strikes a lot of fear in my heart, because I was raised Presbyterian, which was kind of very soft Christian, it was relaxed. And then suddenly, as I became at adolescence, and into I was in my adolescence. I was the youngest of 3 children. My mother found this evangelistic church. Now the man somehow was getting all the women. This is a Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, Pittsburgh, Avalon neighborhood, and he was getting all the women to follow him like he was Jesus. And he had this woman, and they somehow had all these women mesmerized, and he had them go to this summer camp. Soon they were doing things like signing over their homes. It was just all this horrendous stuff was happening with this couple led by this charismatic man. And so I wanted to go to camp. All my cousins got to camp, and we were so poor I never got to go to summer camp. And so I was invited to this weekend camp, and it was a trick. It was these evangelists, and they took me over to Catherine Coleman's church in Ohio, and they were not going to return me. They kept going back to this camp, and I insisted, you have to take me home. I don't know what I said. I knew that I was doomed, that they were going to try to keep me and convert me. The entire weekend, from the moment we got into the car to the moment they finally dropped me off back at my home, was just continuous prayer. So it wasn't prayer because it was spiritual, religious, and wanting to do good and wanting to connect to God or Jesus. It was a onslaught of psychological manipulation. They were trying to get my soul and somehow brainwashed me into believing the way they believed. And so that was terrifying. But to come back to the family, what happened with Eisenhower
No,
He said,
wait, Janet. Tell
wait.
what happened when you were in the back of the car, when they trapped you in the back of the car, baby.
That's what I'm not going in there at that level. But yeah, I was trapped in the back of the car, and they were just ramming me with their beliefs. And anyway, I can't go into it right now, honey. I've got to stay hosting the show. It's so heavy for me. I will get destabilized, and I cannot get destabilized in the middle of doing this show. But needless to say, it deeply affected me to the core of my being, and I saw how dangerous religions could be. And so both my parents were gone from a nice, normal religion into this evangelical religion, like Karen describes. And my life was hell until they finally died, and I just had to cope with it and manage it. But it was always shaming, blaming. They were gone. It's sad. They were gone to me on that level. So I see how these cults get in and they program people. And I'm not sure how they do, but I observe it, and I've had it happen. So what I wanted to say about the family is what Eisenhower said, wait, we can't have this prayer breakfast because we need separation of church and state. And so that was in my understanding of the United States of America. And that's why my ancestors got on the Mayflower, was freedom of religion. And that's freedom to be who we are, not freedom to all be different Christian religions. I live in Hawaii, in Maui. We have a very diverse culture. We have Buddhists. We have all kinds of religions over here. And that's what the United States is about. But this family and their system, it's a big converting system, and it's going out to the entire world. And maybe Russell can catch us up on that. Maybe he took better notes than I did. But somehow they went over to a Muslim country, the two evangelists, and you didn't watch it, honey. So there was another country I wanted to show to you before the show. And they went in and they got this Muslim, they got everybody to pray in the name of Jesus. Everybody. It didn't matter what religion it was. They just got them all, we're going to pray to Jesus. And somehow they were taking the entire world with all the world's religions. Now they had gone beyond color, so they were embracing all colors. They had gone beyond politics, they're embracing all politics. And they were focused on this one thing. It's almost like the MK Ultra mind control, where they have the different keywords like Monarch, Project Monarch, and Disney. It's like the keyword Jesus would evoke a mind control program, and people would all of a sudden be hypnotized and mesmerized, and they would be marching into this single concept, which would turn everybody into like these mind controlled robots. I can't quite explain it, but I just saw it and I was terrified. So I'm going to pass it back to Russell. Russell's been taking good notes. I didn't have time to go back to it. I watched this about a month and a half ago. I was intending to watch it again, but go ahead, Russell. I know you took good notes.
Well,
bring it back home.
Religion in general is ripe for exploitation by anybody that wants money or power. And you mentioned Uganda, with the kill the gays, Ahmed Bahati. There's a fellow named that was mentioned in the series named Robert Adderholt, and he was for the Coalition of the Family in Romania, and he petitioned for the redefining of marriage from spouses to one man and one woman. So this whole anti-gay agenda is being promulgated, across the board throughout the world. And the National Prayer Breakfast at some point began to become access to power and acceptance. That's the bottom line, is the American politicians feel like they have to belong to this thing to have access to power and votes and acceptance. And in 2018, there was approximately 60 Russians attended, one of whom was Alexander Torshin, who, according to the miniseries, has ties with the Russian mob. And he attended the prayer breakfast along with Maria Butina. So you've got all of these people who are infiltrating an American religious movement with this national prayer breakfast to try to co-opt politicians into policies that are actually the goals of Moscow. And a former intelligence officer and counterterrorism expert, Malcolm Nance, he's written a couple of books in the last 2 years about this, and he just says flat out that Trump is beholden to Russian oligarchs and has ties with the Russian mob. So we could be in deep doo-doo, with the whole thing. I think that's one of the reasons he's wanting to hide his tax returns, is that it shows the extent of the financial ties and connections with countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia, and he doesn't want everybody to know that. There's a particular virulent strain of right-wing gun-advocating Christian pastors. And I don't want to mention their names, but there's two in particular. One's in Tempe, Arizona, who came out publicly that they were happy that all of the gay guys got killed at the Pulse massacre in Orlando, because that just rid the world of sodomites. And they're telling, like Janet was saying, they're telling women that they need to be quiet in church and ask their husband if they have any questions. And that ties into the whole abortion issue, because in 1973, Republican Supreme Court justices made abortion legal and did it again in 1992. But one train of thought is when in the 70s, when white supremacy wasn't actually getting Republicans the votes that it once did, they held a think tank and they came up with this idea of this pro-life rhetoric that has become really strong in the right-wing Christian movement. They just feel like as long as they say they're pro-life, that they're morally superior to the Democrats or the liberals who are godless atheists. So, yeah, religion is really becoming part and parcel of American politics. And, there's the whole debate whether America was founded on the idea that it's a Christian nation versus a secular nation. And that'll tie into, what we can talk about in the second hour with the advent of the Satanic Temple, because since modern strains of Christianity have vacated so far away from the original message of Christ, there's actually satanic sects popping up in the United States that are advocating for empathy towards others and egalitarianism and social justice, and they're actually, ironically, taking the place of what the Christians actually should be doing. So, on one hand, the Christians have gone off into prosperity theology and money worship and power worship and all that, while the satanic organizations have taken the role of political advocacy for separation of church and state and egalitarianism towards all perspectives. So, I'm done.
Karen?
So you were talking about rhetoric and what people say, and this is a key thing. So this saying, I'm pro-life. Well, I had when I was still kind of under the influence of these ideas, I had children. My youngest child was born with disabilities, and that began a sort of almost like a flashlight into what it really meant by pro-life. And so, what is pro-life? So you've got to look, anytime you're looking at a philosophy, there's the idealism of it, and then there's the reality of it. There's the ideal, there's the branding, hey, we do this, and then there's actually what happens. So this is a fair point at this point, is there really true pro-life to just try to make sure all babies get born, but when the babies are born, they have frustrating access to the mothers, the babies and children, and everybody having a frustrated access to health insurance, clean air and water, enough food to eat that's good quality. I mean, once you're born, it doesn't seem like they care about your life too much or your quality of life too much after that. Now, one of the things that's kind of undermining position at this point is that Trump, we can talk about this when we talk about the basic minimum needs. Trump came in on the idea that our quality of America is slipping because of immigrants coming in and taking up our jobs and social services and all these kind of tropes that he preaches. One of the things that is going to put all of us in completely new light is the fact during the last 10 years, especially after the tax cuts, that we had, tax cuts to the wealthy was supposed to trickle down jobs. It didn't happen by the numbers. The income of the workers didn't happen. But two things did happen. One, they did stock buybacks of their stock, and two, they started automating the crap out of jobs. Now, this is like that to the fire of discontent. What is going on with people's ability to make a living and survive? This is happening whether we like it or not. Billions are being invested, and we only have some technology people, talking about it. But we, in between something you and I've talked about, Janet, now in Star Trek,
yes.
Okay, with that Star Trekian universe, is the major changes akin to what they now call the fourth industrial revolution. And so now we're going to have completely different words coming in, different concepts, different ideas. It's going to kind of throw into light these concepts and ideas that these people write on their memes, their rhetoric, and their mantras. It's going to throw it into a different light. So I think it's interesting because this I don't believe went anywhere useful to everybody. It's not a social contract to make everybody give lip service to a belief, because that's what it'll be. It won't be that you actually believe it. It will be that you will give lip service to it. And we've seen regimes of it. You know how that works. They're not good, and they usually step up the violence and control. And certain groups will suffer more than other groups. So we're in the middle with our popcorn of this movie to see how it turns out, for sure. And with that, I pass the stick.
Sasha.
As long as you have political systems that are based on dominator consciousness and corporations, which are pseudo-personalities that can skip paying. It's such a dysfunctional system of governance that any institution that plays in that game, the game of lobbyists and bribing, and is doomed because they're within a system which doesn't make sense. This is a government institution, and religion is just another agency of it, which is meant to. The function of this kind of government is theft, stealing, and so what you need is systems of governance by consensus from the heart chakra. And this religion is not of the heart chakra when it's having people murdered in the streets. It's disgusting. I pass.
Okay, over to me. Well, in the family, there was the young men would go to a house where they all lived together, and the young women all lived together. And just like in Handmaid's Tale, the young women, they were conditioned from the youngest age on to just want to be good wives and mothers. And they said, well, if my husband is happy, then I will be happy. And it was just total conditioning for half of our world's population to have no concepts of wanting to do anything to contribute to the world, except be a mother and a wife to a man. It was just I don't know. It goes back to this conditioning I had as a child when I was stuck in front of the TV, just like many of us in the 50s, 60s, were stuck in front of a TV. And there's all this MK Ultra mind control conditioning us to be good little doobies, like I'm thinking of Romper Room. Do be a good bee and follow directions. We've been indoctrinated from moment one how to follow directions. We've been indoctrinated from childhood. Here's the ideal family. Leave it to Beaver. The Nelsons. Ricky Ricardo was abusive. He spanked Lucy. I saw an episode and I went, oh my God, we were being indoctrinated. We were being trained that women were supposed to be so obedient that it was okay for our husbands, if we disobeyed them, for our husbands to take us over their knees and spank us and even spank the children. So this was, punishment. We were taught the punishment system, that some man could punish us. It was just it's just, I don't know, it's just incredible. Okay, so, I'm looking at the clock. We have a little bit of time, about 8 minutes before the top of the hour. Let's finish up this family documentary. But one of the other documentaries that were out, and I didn't put it on the page, I think I'll go grab it, was, what was that called? Hail Satan. And so I watched this this series of the family, and then it just popped up, and it was about the separation of church and state, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek and kind of a spoof, but it was a real movement about the temple of Satan, and they were trying to get what were they? They were trying to get the statue, the traditional statue of Satan with the horns, on all the government properties where they have the Ten Commandments displayed. And they said, well, we really should have all the symbols up there. So I'm going to pass it back to Russell. You watched Hail Satan, and I don't know if anybody else got to watch it. I found it. It was gone on Netflix. It's now on Hulu, and it's actually quite funny. It's lighthearted and funny, but it's not funny because it's like there is no separation of church and state. And there's no equality with the religions, and the Christian religions get all their stuff. And if they don't get their way, like they didn't want to have the Church of Satan addressing in Arizona, they said, well, you get to say the prayer before the meeting of the council. We do too. And they let all these other religions, some of these wrestling papers, please mute. They did all these other all these other religions, but when it came the turn for the Church of Satan to get up and say their opening prayer, they eliminate prayer whatsoever, and they replace it with a moment of silence. Back to you, Russell.
Well, yeah, that's the history of modern Satanism can be something that we address in detail in the next hour. But as far as the Satanic Temple goes, I think they serve a function because they were actually inspired. They were founded in 2013 by a fellow named Lucien Grieves. That's not his real name. And Malcolm Jarry, as a non-theistic political activist group who uses satanic imagery to promote egalitarianism, social justice, and the separation of church and state. And the whole reason that they tried to get that Baphomet statue in there was to address the issue of the separation of church and state and get them to take down the Ten Commandments. That was the only function of it. Lucien said, we really don't want the statue there, but if you're going to put up the Ten Commandments, then you need to be open to other religions. And the idea for the Satanic Temple was actually inspired by George W. Bush's White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And on April the 25th of 2019, they were actually granted tax-exempt status, and they now have about 50,000 members worldwide. So what started out kind of on a lark to prove a point of separation of church and state has actually become a big thing for them. And they were active in opposing the Westboro Baptist Church, as we all know, would show up and harass funerals of gay people that were being buried and everything. And they got back on the founder, Fred Phillips, who's passed away now, by doing a ritual on his mother's grave to turn her gay in the afterlife. And I thought that was hilarious.
It's kind of a funny documentary.
But yeah. But in the next hour, we can go into the whole history of the Church of Satan and some offshoots of that and everything. But getting back to what you were saying about patriarchy, Janet, I think the whole crux of the feminist movement is to get us out from under this patriarchy. What we don't want is the American Taliban operating here in the United States, where there's a certain religion that you have to be a member of to even get elected to office, and everybody has to comply to the rules of the Taliban. We don't want that. So, the country was founded on religious freedom, and that means freedom of all religions, including Islam, the Church of Satan, whatever. So if you're going to have prayer in school, then, you should be open to the Satanic Temple, doing their prayer groups as well. So they serve the Satanic Temple serves the purpose of exemplifying why we want a separation of church and state. So I actually think they're serving a useful purpose.
Yeah, it was a very interesting concept, and I found myself laughing and agreeing with them and saying, well, you have to point out how absurd you are. I don't know if the evangelists realize how absurd they are, or are they truly that evil? They do understand it. It just blows my mind. What do you think? Are they really, like you said earlier, you thought that Doug Coe was, a good man that was righteous, but when I saw him, I thought he was just a manipulator. And we have about 1 minute,
I can understand both views, but if you go back to the original commission, that Jesus gave his apostles to go out into the world and preach the gospel, he was just fulfilling that as sincerely as he could. But his whole stealth organization, has now been co-opted. Whatever his original intentions were, good or bad or whatever, it's been co-opted into the modern evangelical movement, and now you have to pass a litmus test to even get elected to office, it seems like, and that's not a direction that I think would be very good for the country to go.
Yeah, what were you going to say, Sash?
Well, it seems to me that it's useful to think of people who have been in religions actually have some spiritual experiences. And as reflective adults, you can take the essence of that spiritual experience and erase the temple or the church or the breakfast where you got the feeling, and just take the feeling and realize it's yours. You can access it inside. It's all of our potential. And just trust in Minerva and the Internet of Things. And who knows? Just think it's like this is just a political thing, but do not let it invalidate real, heartfelt spiritual experiences that you had, because they're your experiences. That's what
Just in time. Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes. See you in 5.
Okay.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Wadiya will remain a dictatorship. Oh, be quiet. Why are you guys so anti-dictators? Imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes and bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person and his family. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could fill your prisons with one particular racial group and no one would complain. You could use the media to scare the people into supporting policies that are against their interests.
Tune in Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time for Liberation Nation with Deacon John, where America comes to hear the truth.
I know this is hard for you Americans to imagine, but please try.
Ohio Exopolitics will be on from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A. Mark Schneider will have guests on that will discuss many important topics, including the state of the world today. However, much of the show will be dedicated to the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. Let me read a short passage from one of his writings. Love is the highest principle of creation, and through it, everything exists in absolute logic. All of nature in its indescribable splendor is nothing but the love of creation, which is expressed visibly. The love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. Please join Mark on Ohio Exopolitics from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A.
It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why The Story Behind the Story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, hi everybody, and welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos on Revolution Radio, Studio B, and I'm your host, Jeff Sharlet Lessin, with Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin, and fellow panelists, Russell Scott Brinegar, Karen Christine Patrick, and our producer is Thomas Becker, amadpainter. Before we get back to the second hour of our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation this week, because we really need your donations to stay afloat, keep bringing you these programs, and we appreciate your donations. Thank you very, very much. Okay, ready to go into our second hour. Sasha,
yeah,
are you back? Aloha,
I am back. I'm hoping that during the break we were discussing how serious the situation is in the United States, and how the right wing fundies that we were talking about are actually preaching, going out and shooting liberals and people that voted for Hillary if Trump asked them to. It's like such a heavy cult, and I thought it would be really good to talk about. The United States may be on the verge of a civil war now. This is very, very serious, and it has to do with cults like the one we're discussing.
Okay, so you want to take the first leg of this second hour roundtable. Go ahead.
No,
I wasn't aware of that happening. Was that something on the news or an article you've read? Is that really where we're going to go? We're going to round up liberals and round up...
Let Russell talk about it. He's done the research.
Okay, Russell, would you fill us in on what your understanding is, where this could go? What does it mean today by launching the impeachment proceedings, whatever you want to call them? Go ahead.
Well, there's a number of TV evangelists that have their own little cult followings on television. One of them is ex-felon Jim Becker, who's selling soup to doomsday preppers, and he's allied himself with the cause of Trump for money. And one of the things that he and several other evangelists have been saying on television, and I've listened to them with my own ears, my own lying ears, is that if Trump is impeached, this is the duty of every Christian to take up arms and engage in a civil war. So it might not even happen naturally, but it's being instigated. There's something that we've talked about before called stochastic terrorism, in which somebody in a position of power uses rhetoric that instigates violence, but stochastic terrorism works in such a way that you can never nail the terrorist. They know what they're doing in a lot of the cases, and they know that what they say is going to be acted out on by people who are loose cannons or have a loose screw out there listening. But they can't really be, you can't determine causality, and you can't charge them with anything. So that's what they call stochastic terrorism. And there's a lot of this stochastic terrorism being done from the White House by 45 himself. And certain acts have already been perpetrated based on his rhetoric that can never be pinned on Trump. And several of the TV evangelists that have allied themselves with Trump because of their personal prosperity theology, they want to use religion to get wealthy and get people to worship wealthy and send them money so they'll get wealthy. It's all about money. Have just come out and said that, you know, we need a civil war if Trump goes down. He's our man. Trump is the president that God has chosen to do his perfect work. And if the powers of evil take Trump down, then Christians need to take up arms and, you know, go take care of business. So it's a powder keg. It's a very dangerous situation because you've got people who really believe in these people and who are willing to express their loyalty in a violent way. So what Sasha was saying is true, that we very well could be on the verge of a violent outbreak, if not a civil war, from the Trump-supporting faction, because they've got this whole doctrine that Trump as an outsider is fighting what they're calling the deep state. And if you look at what the deep state is, it's the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, and world banks, all of which Trump is in bed with big time. He just overlooked the murder of an American journalist in order to sell billions of dollars worth of arms to Saudi Arabia, and I think he did a second round going bypass from Congress. So you've got somebody that's very active in all the things that the deep state or the Illuminati or the cabal that runs the world that profit from every bullet fired on every side of every conflict on earth. That's what they do. That's how they make their money. That's their bread and butter, is war, perpetual war. And I've always said how we will know the person that's actually fighting the deep state is somebody who actively tries to reduce or dismantle the United States military presence in 1,000 military bases in 153 countries. You've got people like Robert David Steele pointing out that all these bases are not there for national defense. They're there to traffic drugs, cash, gold, and small children. Those are his words, not mine. So you've got a lot of nefarious activity going on within the United States military involvement throughout the world. And anybody that's elected president that would fight the deep state would be looking for renewable energy to replace the fossil fuel industry, natural cures to bump off big pharma, dismantling the military-industrial complex, which President Eisenhower warned us of in a parting speech. So I don't buy into this rhetoric that Trump's fighting the deep state. I think he's feeding it. And I think the cabal that people are worried about that's running this world based on perpetual war and profit are infiltrating both parties, both the Democrat and the Republican Party, and they have a lot of money and power, so chances are they're going to get their person that they want in there to do their bidding and perpetuate their fortune and power.
Wow. Well, I agree with you. That's what I thought. I've always thought QAnon was just Orwellian doublespeak, and it's just supporting. It's saying that they're supporting getting rid of the deep state and arresting everybody, but it's not. It's the opposite. Karen, your turn.
Well, yeah, that is like the rhetoric. I've heard it a lot myself. They took ideas from the Bible that would hold up sort of a hierarchical viewpoint or of how the paradigm that they're looking at kind of is wanting to bring that about. But I mean, do we have to say yes to that? Can we just say no? I do not consent. And so that's really where the problem area that they got, and I like to point this out, is okay. So what I think having worked with you guys' material, Sasha and Janet, about the story of the Anunnaki, I think what the takeaway I got from that is that there seems to be sort of two basic, operating systems going on with humans. One is a freedom one based on self-generating, goals and ideals and what you're going to do, and you don't really need a boss. You can run on your own, from within what you feel you're excited about and you want to do, and typically that's kind of a building sort of, I want to go build something, I want to go do something, I want to have a dream and all that. So this other mindset is more of a, yes, we could have all those things, but we got to be organized, and we have to, so I would think if there's two kind of parents we're looking at, it's the ones that send you to prep school and you got to wear a uniform, study the 3 hours and go to college, versus the hippies, you're out in the fields, planting through the flowers and learning about nature. So it's kind of two ideas of how things should run here. And so what you as a person, looking at all this with dismay is, yes, those people are running on that program, but it is an operating system, as Terrence McKenna pointed out. It is a program, and then really what kind of flips the dial on that is, does it work for you? So here, the interesting twist that I see is, yes, they have, put these ideas in people's heads, but if they think they've got a ready, willing, and able Roman, legion kind of army ready to go out there, they got another thing coming because of the greed factor. The greed factor's been so high that you've literally maybe pushed a few people into buying a bunch of guns and, storing food and all that. But not everyone can do that. Most people in your standing army that you think you're going to count on to do all that are actually struggling quite a bit with the economy, which in this 10-year period of time since the Lehman breakdown, I remember it very well. I was stacking magazines on the shelf, and our magazine, sales went down by 50%, so my hours went thusly, because that was the big move when everyone went online to get their information rather than getting it from newspapers and magazines, and I remember it very well. And we never got that back. Automation changed and people's tastes changed. And now that we did that, we've got our bubble. So one of the things I try to do as a person is get out of my own bubble and look at all the different, sort of meta things going on. But what I say to the people that are going to have, on their Christian shoulders, I say, that might be their intent. That might be what they're calling for. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to happen. And if we don't want that to happen, what do we offer people? And then you got to go to what is the, other side. So that's problem already, this or that. What is the other side presenting, and look at that. And is that any better? And what is all these ideas seem reasonable, and what of them are just in the, of a philosophy? How many of the ideas are just to maintain a hierarchy? So, I often have said on this program that 10 years ago, literally 10 years ago exactly, November, I started writing, automatic writing of all of this stuff, and it kind of the writing zeroed in and talking about hierarchy. So all of these things are hierarchical constructs. They're supposed to make sure that everybody has what they need. I mean, you're supposed to that's what an economy is for. That's what a country is for. It's to make sure that people have well-being. And if what one group says we're going to get that well-being one way, and the other group saying we're going to get their well-being the other way, and neither one is accomplishing that, now we got to step back and go, okay, where did the well-being go? Or how come people are struggling so hard for? And that's what I've gotten more interested in, especially in the last year, because I just feel like, okay, fighting, killing, dying, how many times have we done that? I mean, I like history. I think it's fun to study all the different areas. Well, sometimes it's not so fun. But, what did people do in the past? And they fought out all that stuff. They ended up with a bunch of war-torn countries. They picked themselves up and did what? That's what I'm interested in. How do we not do that? And we know where that's going to go. It's just going to be violent deaths. People that are vulnerable are going to suffer the most. And it's wasted time. I think it's a waste of time. So, when I'm talking to people in that mindset, I'm going, okay, so you do that, and then what? Right now, how do you make supposedly the richest country in the world, which is supposedly Christian, how come we have so many homeless? How come we have people starving? How come we have people not forming families with their family values? They won't even get married and have kids now because there's no future. So that's where my head's at.
Okay, Sash.
Yeah, I think it makes a great deal of difference what the charge in the impeachment is. Pelosi's was just saying, he subverted the Constitution. But what we really should be going for is treason, because that will remove treason. If he's removed for treason, that means we get rid of Pence, who is Cotton Mather, who's going to enslave women here. Don't you get it? And all these people who head the Environmental Protection Agency and the Immigrant Welcoming Committee, and all those people who are just trying to kill anything decent and human, and get rid of all of them. And so Pelosi's too weak. It's got to be treason. That's what he's done.
All right. Sasha's impassioned. Okay, it's my turn, I guess. My turn. Yeah, I hear you. It's like, what happened to our world? What happened to people loving each other and caring about each other? I'm an old hippie. I grew up in the 60s. We were going into a different reality than what we have now. Somehow, our world got hijacked, and, I'd like to set it back on course. I know that upsets a lot of people because they think that if we're lazy, the reason why you don't have money is you're lazy. It's kind of like that Christian thing that you're blessed by Jesus, that's why you have money. Well, you don't have money because you're lazy, but it's got nothing with laziness. I've worked my entire life. I'm 65. I'm still working my ass off. My husband's 79. We're still working our ass off. You go down to Walmart, the greeter is 85. It's like, when do we ever get to rest? I remember my poor father, he worked his entire life. He was in World War II, and he worked 39 years as a postal worker, and then he retired, and he didn't have enough to make ends meet. He was still in the struggle. And I said, Dad, what happened? He said, well, back when I was told how much I'll get when I retired, I thought I could live on that. But, we're not getting a living income at what it takes to live in this world. There's so many, and it's because the resources which belong to the entire planet are being hoarded. Hoarding is a mental illness by the few rich at the top that are keeping our flow of resources that belong to the entire planet. Our job is to be a consumer. We consume products and services, and to keep money flowing. The money flows what keeps the economy healthy and everybody happy. And that's what the original Constitution is, the pursuit of happiness. Well, do we get to ever find it, or do we just keep pursuing it until we drop ever dead? Anyway, let's see. Where's
basic income.
18. Basic needs. Basic minimum needs to meet the needs economy. And it's a big catch-22. You've got to do it all, or the different little factions aren't going to work. So we'll get into it. But I know that Russell sent us some things in his wish list of topics. We will do more shows. We'll find a date that works for everybody. But let's focus on let's go back in time. We'll go back in the time machine. When did all this stuff, all this religious stuff start? So Russell's going to cue us in and teach us about Satanism versus Luciferianism, the history of the Satanic movement in the USA, etc. Oh, in the U.S. And then that's here a comparison of Anton LaVey. Okay, take it away. I know you've taken good notes.
It's a really fascinating story. At the end of the last hour, we talked a little bit about the most recent incarnation of American Satanism, which is called the Satanic Temple, which was actually inspired by George W. Bush's White House Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. Two people, Malcolm Jerry and Lucien Grieves, felt like they needed to counter that with some sort of alternative religion. So they formed the Satanic Temple in 2013, and they've done some really interesting stunts, like tried to put a Baphomet statue where they were going to place the Ten Commandments at a courthouse to emphasize. And they've done things like come out in support of Rick Perry, I think his name, and different politicians that they really don't like, but they feel like the endorsement of the Satanic Temple will make a point that they're in league with the devil or whatever. But as Lucien Grieves will point out, the Satanic Temple is not the first incarnation of Satanism in America. In 1966, it started out with Anton LaVey, who had a black house in San Francisco and started the Church of Satan. And he passed away in 1997. In the 60s and the 70s, it was sort of it's actually an atheistic religion. The Church of Satan does not believe in a literal Satan. They don't believe in God, Jesus, Satan, nothing. They're atheists. And even Anton LaVey said that it's basically secular humanism with a touch of theater. And people that are card-carrying members of the Church of Satan seem to enjoy the shock value that pulling out their card that they belong to the Church of Satan in a circle of Christians. They like throwing a wrench in the works. But they really do not believe in a literal Satan, which is very different from other forms of Satanism and Luciferianism. But in 2001, a man named Peter Gilmore took over the Church of Satan, and ironically, he moved it to the Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, New York City. And he classifies the Satanists as skeptical atheists that don't believe in God, Jesus, or Satan or anything. Anton LaVey criticized Abrahamic religions for suppressing humanity's natural instincts, and they view this mythological figure, which they don't even believe in, Satan, as the adversary. And all of the scholars agree that there is no historical provenance for this brand of Satanism prior to 1966. But membership now involves just paying $225 and filling out a registration statement. And the membership is estimated at about 20,000. So this is where, because they went that direction, kind of a commercial direction, there's another fellow in the mix who was involved in the U.S. military named Colonel Michael Aquino. And in 1975, he actually had joined Anton LaVey's Church of Satan in 1969, and he quickly rose up through the ranks. But he didn't like the direction that LaVey was taking it in the commercial aspect of it. He was much more interested in a philosophical version of Satanism. So in 1975, Michael Aquino, who actually has a degree in American political science, founded the Temple of Set. And he conducted his own ritual to invoke Satan, and by automatic writing wrote this work called The Book of Coming Forth by Night. And in this book, according to Aquino, Satan revealed his true identity as the Egyptian deity known as Set. So this enters in the Setians, and they believe that Set, the Egyptian god Set, is the one true God who brings enlightenment and questioning intellect to mankind. And they believe in self-deification and the immortality of consciousness. That is their goal, is to give into your natural instincts, be who you really are, be totally human, and self-deify, and the goal is the immortality of consciousness, the advancement of human consciousness to immortality, which strangely coordinates with some of the goals of the modern transhumanist movement, the people that want to upload their consciousness into silicon and become immortal. So then you enter into the Satanic Temple, but there's a whole different aspect of Satanism that's referred to as Luciferianism. Now, this does have a historical provenance all the way back to Gnosticism, and they regard Lucifer as the one true God as opposed to Jehovah, and they regard Lucifer as the liberator and the guiding spirit. The Hebrew word for Lucifer is Hallel, which means the shining one or light bearer, and the Greek Lucifer is Hesephoros, which means bringer of dawn or light bearer. And Lucifer is actually Latin for the morning star or Venus. So there's an ancient connection between Lucifer and the planet Venus, which is really interesting. But later Christian traditions use Lucifer for the devil as he was before the fall. You know, we've all heard the mythology that prior to the fall, even in the New Testament, Jesus saw Lucifer fall like lightning from heaven. So there's this whole idea that he was one of the more brilliant angels, and then he sinned somehow or became self-infatuated, and then there was the fall of Lucifer. But Luciferian differs from Satanism is that it doesn't revere Satan or the devil, but the broader figure of Lucifer, the enlightened one. And they regard Lucifer as representing human progression, independence, and enlightenment. A long time ago, I read a book by Richard Kinniger, who went by the pen name Eklal Quashana. He wrote a wonderful book called The Ultimate Frontier, and basically tells the story of when he was 10 years old. He was approached by a guy named Mr. White, who was a member of the Great White Brotherhood, and they were basically Luciferians. It said the great angel Lucifer is responsible for humanity's present advancement. So we hear a lot about Luciferianism and the Illuminati and the Cabal, that they're practicing Luciferians, but basically it's a path of self-deification and enlightenment. So Luciferians cherish the natural world and advocate for its protection, as well as the arts and sciences, as these represent human progression. And the focus of Luciferians is on this physical life and how to make the most of it. And there's a famous Luciferian, Michael Ford, who authored the 11 Luciferian Points of Power. And this is associated with liberation, illumination, apotheosis, and the worship of the inner self. So you've got the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey, that do not believe in Satan or God or Jesus. Then you've got an offshoot of that, a more modern version, the Satanic Temple, who also do not believe in anything. They're basically atheists. In fact, in the film on Netflix called Hail Satan, several of the members identified with being an atheist before the Satanic Temple come along, and it just sort of gave them something to latch onto and add a touch of excitement and esotericism and theater to their lives by taking on the whole. A lot of them listened to hardcore heavy metal, and they kind of lived in that world anyway, the goth world or whatever. So by joining the Satanic Temple, they get to be an atheist, but they also get to have some flair, you know. So that's my little synopsis. The Church of Satan and the modern incarnation, the Satanic Temple, as opposed to a more ancient religion of Luciferianism, which is a more serious religion that actually do believe that there is a Lucifer and that he is the one true God that's responsible for human knowledge and an inquiring spirit and human enlightenment. So there you go. I'm complete.
That's great. Did you type that up, or is that all? If you have that, I'd like to have that. If you want to send it to me, that'd be great. But thanks for doing all that hard work. That's awesome. Yeah. So, Karen, what would you like to say?
Oh, no, I thought the historical perspective was interesting, because one of the things I found out was quite a few people in the hierarchy of this cult that I was in were kind of playing both ends against the middle, in the sense that they had, publicly espoused Christian tenets and hierarchy and all that kind of stuff, but they also, many of them, in the ones that were more militaristic especially, were also connected to sort of groups that had some of those similar beliefs. So, it's a situation where there's these isms and different things, but there's also intentions of people individually in how they would use either the language or maybe a power boost or a prestige boost in various groups. So, to me, I just, it's kind of like I always end up back in the same place as far as when I'm hearing people's ideas and what their philosophies are, is that, what is it a hierarchically, controlling type of group? And that can be all kinds of things. I remember a lady from Texas telling me that she was in a knitting club and there was about 10 ladies in the knitting club and they got in a big fight about who was going to be the president of the knitting club, and she said they almost stabbed each other with their knitting needles, so it's kind of like, people sometimes, this hierarchy thing cuts through all kinds of groups, and some have good intentions and they even act on those intentions, but there's some times within any group you're in where there's certain people that have a different agenda. And one area of discussion for a lot of people nowadays that used to never even have any words around it was the narcissistic personality type or the narcopathic personality type. So somebody who's not just narcissistic, but they have sociopathic or psychopathic intentions as well. And their agenda is not, do I believe in some kind of philosophy that I'm going to act on to try to, help myself get ahead or just, make the world a better place, whatever the goal is, could sound very noble, is that they've got an internal sort of black hole of need that can never be satiated, and they look at their associations and whatever group that they're in, and they start a manipulation based on their narcissistic needs. And it seems like we have tendency for our groups to kind of head in that direction. They start out, have a worthy goal, and it reminds me of a corporation, even like the Red Cross or other big organizations or Goodwill. I mean, these really, really big charitable organizations, and I'm picking on Goodwill because they started cutting pay or cutting people who were disabled who were working in the programs, and at the same time they were cutting those jobs, they were raising the pay of the CEO. So we have this sort of problem with the fact that people get into these power positions and then that's what they're about. And it didn't matter what the goal of the group was. It might have good intentions or good goals. It's just that some people that take that and go with a different way of it. And it leaves people very confused about their involvement. And I think people are shaking loose a little bit of groups and sitting back and going, are we really getting the value out of our joining together and doing projects, or does it always kind of end up feeding the pocketbook or the needs of one person in the organization? And right now, if I'm going to talk to people about hierarchy and narcopaths and sociopaths and all that, I really don't think that we could beat, in terms of an example, of the sociopath in chief that we now have. He's a great exhibit A just because he doesn't even do the things that the people want him to do. If you look at his front-wise values even, they're very skewed from people's, what they say is their cherished beliefs, and getting away with all kinds of stuff. And I don't even think for people who are very pure-minded in their intention is what they wanted to have happen. I really don't. And so now we got to deal with this, our narcopath in chief, So I'll pass the state.
Okay, Saj, your turn.
Yeah, I would like to point out that from my work with Dick Price in the 60s at Esalen Institute and extensive talks with my colleague Monique Lessin, there is another kind of satanic church which involves the having children kill each other and terrible things. And this is not just a minor thing. This is a huge thing with kidnapped people all over, and you can't run in some of these. You can't run to the authorities because it's the sheriff and the county council that's doing it. And and the CIA, Monique says, is involved in this too. And it's got a ritual, it invokes Dracos, and people call it satanic too. I mean, that's none of the things you've been discussing so far, but there is something that goes on, and the intelligence services serve this awful thing too. That's you may all have something to say about that. But Monique's the expert on it. That's where I got a lot of case material.
Well, that goes back to the origins of religions. And so one of the things that Russell was asking, are God, Satan, angels, and demons extraterrestrials? So from my understanding and my research is that the origins of religions went back to the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki had to control, manipulate a population where there were so few of them and so many of us. So they put this system in place where they would divide and conquer, and they keep dividing and conquering humanity through creating religions and then sub-religions and more religions and philosophies and countries and divisions of the world into smaller and smaller countries. And every time there's an effort towards unification, oneness, and universal consciousness, there's an equal opposite reaction, effort to divide and conquer and keep us feeling isolated and alone and separate. So in the Emerald Tablets, both Nikashita, Enki's son, he encountered this demonic force, I want to call it like an interdimensional, the Archons, some other power that was beyond the Anunnaki that was coming into the council, and they had the ability to take over council members, and so I think that was the original encountering of another force that was even darker than they could imagine. And so he, in the story of the Emerald Tablets, he said he had to destroy Atlantis in order to block their access into third-dimensional Earth physicality. And that he warned, he said, I stopped this episode, but they will be back, and they are taking over the members of the council and the leaders of the world. And then David Icke talks about that. He says that, the royals are taken over by these interdimensional, and they call it satanic, mainly because the word Satan just means adversary. It didn't mean Enki or Enlil. It wasn't really, although different, the winners of the battle would put their descriptives on the losers, right? So that's how they got these titles. So we see a confusion based on what Russell described to us as the history, and then how everything gets confused and manipulated, and now that actually invalidates perhaps ideals or theosophies that are valid, but they label them and confuse them and manipulate them, and so they invalidate individuals and different movements, and that's part of the process to this day. We see our president labeling people and using names like a bully in a schoolyard, and the name calling for some reason. It's not the fact that we have a president that calls people names, it's that the people buy into it and they start bullying and validating people in the same way, by taking the name and bullying along with the bully. So I'm not sure what to do about this, but I'll pass it back to Russell.
Okay, I don't know if you are familiar with a man that was murdered not too long ago named Ronald Bernard. But Ronald Bernard was a Dutch banker, a very high-level Dutch banker, and he provided his testimony on YouTube about what the end of that whole banking industry is, and worked his way up into levels of secrecy, and was finally in a situation where they brought out a small child, and they were trying to entice him on participating in a child sacrifice ritual. And when he talks about this, he just gets completely choked up and he's on the verge of tears. And you can tell that he's telling the truth. So within the ranks of Luciferianism, which, as Ronald Bernard says, it doesn't matter if you believe in Lucifer, they do, and there is a faction of Luciferianism that's very much in contact with this entity that this world calls this Satan or the devil. And I'd like to bring in a little bit of cosmology from the Urantia book on there, because it actually has some interesting things to say about Lucifer, if you don't mind.
Sure.
to give listeners just a little brief background, the Urantia book is a channeled work. It's 2,000 and some pages. It was published in 1955, but it was actually channeled in the 30s. There was a psychologist named Dr. Sadler who had a woman who said her husband said strange things in a trance state, and he went over there and started doing transcriptions of it, and this turned into the Urantia book. But it's a very elaborate, complicated, internally consistent, believe it or not, cosmology that's way out there. But Urantia is the name that allegedly celestial beings give to planet Earth. It's called Urantia, according in their circles. And our universe, the universe of Nebadon, exists with other universes in what's called a super universe of Orvanton. And we happen to live in a local cluster of 606 inhabited worlds in a system known as Satania. And it's thought that this local cluster of 606 inhabited worlds called Satania is where the figure of Satan actually got his name. But according to the Urantia book, Lucifer is one of 700,000 created beings, all of whom had to do with mortal's ascension path. And Lucifer, according to the Urantia book, was a sovereign. Satan was a different personality who was sort of like a lieutenant to Lucifer. And there's also another figure named Caligastia who, according to the Urantia book, was a planetary prince of Urantia for about 200,000 years to the present, until the advent of Jesus, or what's known as Christ Michael in the Urantia book. But these 606 worlds are listed in order that they came about, and it's interesting that the number one in our system is called A Nova, and this is a very advanced population of beings that have long since been settled in love and light. So not all planets out there, according to the Urantia book, are as chaotic and into this dualistic cosmic battle. Some of the more angelic forces elsewhere in the galaxy have long since settled their systems in love and light. And Lucifer, according to the Urantia book, is now deposed and held on a prison world for the sin of introducing doubt into the minds of these various celestial personality about the human ascension path. Lucifer, according to the Urantia book, suggested that the Paradise Father, the Universe Father, the creator of everything, is a myth. So even amongst these high celestial beings that are described in great detail in the Urantia book, there still is not a direct knowledge of the Universe Father. There's a belief structure involved, and Lucifer suggested the idea that the Universe Father was a myth. And Lucifer and Satan are connected with this other figure, Caligastia, who was our planetary prince for 200,000 years in a globally interconnected civilization known as Dalmatia that goes back to 500,000 years. So there's a whole cosmology depicted in the Urantia book. But basically, according to the Urantia book, Lucifer believed that the Universe Father is a myth. Our local universe of Nebadon should remain autonomous instead of under the sovereignty of Christ Michael and a fictional deity. So Lucifer said that the alleged ascension path for mortals is a hoax, and at the end of their ascension path, they're just returned to humble mortal beginnings where they all started out from. So the Luciferian rebellion was about self-assertion and freedom from authority. And it's amazing to me how this whole cosmology that's outlined in the Urantia book about Lucifer and Satan strangely coordinates with the Gnostic version of Lucifer as the light bearer, and Richard Kenneger's version that Lucifer is responsible for our present advancement by the introduction of a knowledge of good and evil and a knowledge of science and everything. And all of it strangely ties into our current technological direction into a technological singularity, which futurists predict will happen between 2045 and 2080, in which we actually become Artilects, or expanded consciousness and intelligence beings who have merged their biology with our technology. And this even ties into a lot of people's perception of the feminist movement. What they fear is this effort to get rid of gender, this whole idea that male and female are exactly the same, that, science says there's two sexes, male and female, and possibly hermaphrodites, but the subject of gender studies is actually new, and it kind of ties into the idea that what the powers that be are attempting are a genderless world to eliminate the concept of sex and gender and get us to accept merging through transhumanism our biology with our technology and becoming an entirely different being. There's an excellent Israeli author named Yuval Noah Harari that wrote a book called Homo Deus, and he gave a little glimpse into the future. And he says, as soon as there's a conscious artificial superintelligence on Earth, our mission is done. So there's two trains of thought. One presented by another author I like, Alex Vokolov, who wrote the Scintillect hypothesis, who sees it very positively that we're going to merge our biology with technology and become an entirely new species called Synthilex. And then there's other people like Harari that actually see it as a bad thing, a dystopian future where as soon as we create this technology for an outside agency that's manipulating us into it, we're just going to be thrown away like corn husks. So it is very interesting that you've got Jehovah and God worshipped by millions of people all over the world, and Jesus is his son, and, you know, love your neighbor as yourself and all that. And then this other voice saying that, no, it's the angel Lucifer, the fallen angel, that introduced the concept of knowledge into an ignorant population, and that you should owe all of our present advancement to the angel Lucifer. So there you have an entire cosmology in a nutshell. So I'm done.
Karen.
You can articulate a whole cosmology in quicker than anyone I know, Russell.
That was great.
I like to throw a monkey wrench in cosmology because I'm just perverse that way. These are, I kind of got to the Urantia book, and I guess I'm just noticing what happens to women and families and vulnerable people in anybody's, idea or ideal. And that's what my concern is I kind of have faith in something maybe people don't necessarily think of, but that there is a natural world and that has programming that's millions of years old in our evolution or creation or manipulation, however you want to look at that. It's still a wisdom and an intelligence that's still present. So we could put that one idea of that in the idea of Gaia, Mother Earth, who's kind of hosting us crazy humans, and we're kind of beating her up a little, which would be a lot. The plastic age is not helping, and so I think there is a reassertion of us as natural beings. As much, if this technology future is not careful with itself and it tries to put us too far away from some prior, like, biological imperatives, right? So one, sort of problem I have with some philosophies is they have this Brett, my partner, comes up with great terms, adversary creation. So we say, hey, we're cool, and those guys over there, if we just got rid of those guys over there, then everything would be perfect. Or if we got rid of the people who weren't cooperating, everything would be perfect. So it kind of drifts over into being a death cult, because if these people just went away, if we just had the final solution, if we, just got rid of those ones that weren't coming along, everything would be great. And yet, those people you're talking about, they're other human beings, and they have a biological imperative, and they're having their families and their kids, and we still have that. I mean, there might be a virtualization of sexuality that might go that way, but there's also sort of everyone included, I say too. I'm not talking about the nuclear family as the only valid family by any means, but the idea that the promulgation of our species has a prior programming, if you will, that's going along. And again, what happens to those populations? So I've shifted myself personally way over into looking at economics, because economics is our value system. Economics is our provision of every single person. And what assumptions have we made that's causing basically mass deprivation so much that people are so involved in just trying to survive every day, it would be very hard for them to imagine, okay, how do I clean up the planet if I can't even get out of the house and go anywhere, you know? So I think underlying all of those other movements too, and I think all of them are trying new ideas. There's new ideas and people are trying to figure out how do we do something different? How do we do it better? How do we do it more equitable? Whereas other people are fighting for service to self. How do I take care of me, you know? I think it's an interesting time. You know what the Chinese said, may you live in interesting times was a curse. So I don't know where we're going. But I just know that those of us who have those concerns have also some reason to be positive in looking that we're talking about it. That's a big thing. We're kind of upending all the stuff we sort of inherited from the 20th century about total war, you know. We're kind of maybe transcending that, I hope. So I'll stop there.
Sasha, your turn.
Yeah, from my perspective, and my perspective is indeed that of a modern existentialist. What we seem to be lamenting in others, we wouldn't lament them unless they were disowned in ourselves. So the way that a psychologist like me looks at things like that, you know, it's if a person can take their exaggerated taker, which is greed, and balance it with their giver. You don't want to give it all away, but you can have a balance between giving and taking. Then you understand that you can center yourself and have both. Competitiveness, which leads to this hierarchy and status that everybody hates. The other side of it is just, if you get to the need that drives it, it's the need for excellence. And violent anger underneath it has a need, which is just the need for appropriate action. And so that rather than having a further dichotomy, you know, us against the Illuminati, I think what we need to do is to look at the traits within ourselves that we haven't come to peace with, and by taming ourselves, perhaps we can tame the world. But if not, you'll be a better human being anyhow. That's it.
Okay, we have like 5 minutes left. So this will be the wrap-up round. Final statements everyone wants to make. There's a lot we can go, a lot of places we can go. I know, Karen, somewhere down the line we need to do, I'd like to work on planetary solutions. This show was dedicated to looking at the problems, but maybe another show in about a month we can talk about what are the solutions or the probable solutions, the directions we can go. And I'm sure based on what happened today, in 30 days, we're going to have a whole different reality to look at. Final round, back to you, Russell. What would you like to say?
Well, taking on what you just said, it's interesting that we have a presidential candidate for 2020 that's talking for the very first time in American history of universal basic income. There are other countries like Finland who are experimenting with this idea, and the whole concept of universal basic income is capitalism from $1,000 starting point instead of capitalism from zero. And there's economists that say giving everybody $1,000 a month right off the bat, you know, would solve a lot of problems and stimulate the economy and do wonders for everybody. But I think it may be a little bit premature because the underlying concept between universal basic income is that our technology are taking over jobs. And I don't think enough people are feeling enough pain right now to accept an idea like universal basic income. I think that day will come. Callum Chase wrote a great book called The Economic Singularity, The Death of Capitalism, where at some point when robots and artificial intelligence are doing all of the jobs that humans currently do, that we're going to have to come up with a completely different economic paradigm. And hopefully it'll be a positive future where it's a moneyless world where material goods are seen as strictly utilitarian and no one spends their entire life hoarding material goods. They're just seen in a utilitarian light, whether it's a house or a car, all of which could just be made for nothing, you know, with our technology and provided for everybody. So there's people that when you describe a world like that would say that that's their idea of hell. that that's a 1984 dystopia, and that there's other people that say, hey, that would free humanity up to pursue the arts and sciences and relationships. You could travel all over the world. There wouldn't be any need for a military, no need for monetary exchange. So we are living in some very interesting times as we get more and more technologically advanced, and this thing really goes into an exponential direction, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with it all.
Aaron, final words.
Yeah, thank you, Russell, for mentioning the candidate is Andrew Yang for president, and he's been doing well enough to be on the debate stage in the major media debates. And yeah, his it's called a freedom dividend. He actually didn't call it the term, another economist did. And it would be they called it that because it was that our country is a composite wealth of all the people who contribute to it, not just the supply side, which is heavily affected by technology as we go along, but the demand side as well. So it's rewriting the consumer as part of the equation, and it's $1,000 a month for every adult over the age of 18. Go to yang2020.com to go see what he's about. But I would say this is that I think I totally agree with you that it's about pain. Like if we start feeling the pain of that more, or it becomes more obvious, like people using self-check at the store and that sort of thing. I think this year's a very interesting year because I track a lot of different technologies, but I've been tracking the driverless technology in particular, and we actually are in a 4-year window that they call Phase 3 of autonomous vehicle development technology, and we're smack in the middle of Phase 3, which is the completion of the technology. The state of Texas has already approved autonomous vehicles being on the road, and they have a 4-state group to do that with. So how about I talk about that again?
And that's the end of our show. Thank you so much, Karen, Russell, Janet, Sasha, and Thomas.
Listen, everybody. Buy Overlords of the Singularity. It's Russell's book. It's a great book, Overlords of the Singularity.
Aloha, blessings.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Narco-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Oscar's freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger, unafraid, right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite, surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing, in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with